Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 deeply unsettling stories from police officers, men and women who responded to calls that started out routine but quickly became something they could never fully explain or forget. These aren't fictional police procedurals or exaggerated tales from the internet. These are real accounts from real officers who encountered situations that challenged everything they thought they knew about their job, their training, and reality itself. Before we dive in, I want to know, do you have respect for the work police officers do? Have you ever wondered what they encounter during those late-night shifts when most of us are safely asleep in our beds? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Because what you're about to hear will make you realize that sometimes, the most terrifying calls aren't the ones involving criminals, they're the ones that can't be explained at all. These officers walked into homes, basements, and dark hallways not knowing what they'd find. And what they discovered changed them forever. Alright, let's begin. And remember, every word of these stories is true. Story 1. The figure in the hallway. I've been a K9 handler for almost 9 years now. My partner is a 4-year-old German Shepherd named Rex. He's trained in tracking and narcotics detection, and he's as solid as they come. I've taken him into abandoned warehouses, condemned houses, dense woods in the middle of the night, and has always been steady, focused, professional. Rex doesn't spook easily. That's what makes him an exceptional police dog. I've seen him track armed suspects through dangerous terrain without hesitation. I've watched him enter buildings that made even veteran officers nervous, and has never once shown fear. That's why what happened that night stuck with me. Because Rex was terrified. And I'd never seen him like that before. We got called in around 11:30 p.m. to assist patrol with a house search. Officers had attempted to stop a male suspect a few blocks away for questioning, and he'd bolted. They chased him through several backyards before losing sight of him near a specific property. When patrol arrived at the house, they found a side gate standing open and the back door unlocked. Neighbors had also reported hearing what sounded like a struggle in the backyard, shouting, something heavy hitting the ground, then silence. Patrol officers swept the first floor but weren't comfortable calling it clear. The layout was confusing, there were too many rooms, and they had a strong feeling the suspect had forced his way inside and was hiding somewhere in the house. That's when they called for Rex and me. We arrived about 20 minutes after the initial call. The house was a 2-story place in a quiet subdivision, the kind of neighborhood where people know their neighbors, where kids ride bikes in the street, where nothing bad is supposed to happen. There were no signs of forced entry from the front. Everything looked normal from the outside, porch light on, lawn neatly maintained, mailbox at the curb. The officers on scene briefed me quickly. They told me they'd cleared the first floor but couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still inside. The suspect had vanished within yards of this house, and with the open gate and unlocked door, it was the most logical place for him to hide. I put Rex on a short leash and gave him the search command. He pulled forward immediately, moving from room to room on the first floor with purpose and focus. Living room, clear. Kitchen, clear. Laundry room, clear. Rex was working perfectly, checking corners, sniffing under furniture, doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. We moved upstairs. The second floor had a narrow hallway with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. There was no fresh air circulating up there, no breeze from open windows. Everything was closed up tight. According to the neighbors, the owners of this house were out of town, which explained why the place felt so stagnant and unused. Rex and I went into the first bedroom, clear. Then the second bedroom, also clear. Standard procedure, everything by the book. Then Rex pulled toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. I let him lead, trusting his nose and his instincts. The bathroom was small and clean. Nothing out of place. A few toiletries on the counter, a shower curtain drawn closed, standard fixtures. Rex sniffed around the edge of the vanity, checked the floor near the toilet. Then he froze. His ears went forward, that alert posture that means he's detected something. His entire body stiffened. And then he started growling. Low and continuous, a sound I'd heard him make before when he sensed a threat. But he wasn't growling at anything in the bathroom. He was staring out into the hallway, locked onto something I couldn't see from where I was standing. Then the growls turned to barks. Loud, aggressive barks. Rex was staring down the hallway, fixated on something at the far end. I stepped backward out of the bathroom with him, my hand instinctively moving to my weapon. "What is it, boy?" I said quietly, following his line of sight. That's when I saw it. At the very end of the hallway, near the last bedroom door, there was a figure. A tall, dark, completely motionless figure. It looked human-shaped, but something about it was wrong. It was too still, too dark, like a shadow that had taken physical form. It definitely didn't look like any of the officers downstairs. They were all in uniform, and I would have recognized them instantly. Plus, they would have announced their presence to me. That's basic protocol. I identified myself clearly. Police. There's a K9 with me. No response. The figure just stood there. Completely silent. Not moving. Who is that? I called out, louder this time. Identify yourself. Still nothing. And then Rex did something I'd never seen him do in 9 years of partnership. Something that made my blood run cold. He started pulling backward. Away from the figure. Away from the hallway. He didn't want to go forward. He wanted to get away from whatever he was seeing. Police dogs are trained to be aggressive, to pursue, to confront. They don't retreat. They don't back down. That's the entire point of their training. But Rex was terrified. As I watched, the figure at the end of the hallway slowly turned and walked into the bedroom. Not quickly, not like someone running from the police. Just a slow, deliberate turn, and then it disappeared through the doorway. I keyed my radio. I've possibly located the suspect in the end bedroom upstairs. I need backup up here now. I could hear footsteps on the stairs, officers responding to my call. I tried to pull Rex forward down the hallway. He resisted. He actually planted his feet and pulled backward, something he'd never done before. Not when tracking armed suspects, not when entering dangerous buildings, never. He kept looking up at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like he didn't understand why I was making him go toward whatever was in that room. Like I was betraying him by forcing him forward. When we finally reached the bedroom doorway, Rex refused to cross the threshold with me. He stayed in the hallway, his body rigid, still growling softly. I took a breath and stepped into the room first, my weapon raised and ready. The bedroom was empty. Completely empty. Just a bed against the wall and a dresser across from it. No one standing in the corner, no one hiding behind furniture. Nothing. The other officers reached the hallway, and we conducted a thorough search. We checked under the bed, nothing. The closet, empty. The window was closed and locked from the inside. There was no attic access, no crawl space, no hidden panels in the walls. We even checked the walls for false panels or hidden doors. Nothing. The room was a dead end with no possible escape route. Rex stayed in the hallway the entire time. He absolutely refused to step foot in that bedroom. One of the other officers tried coaxing him in, offering treats, using commands. Rex wouldn't budge. He just stood there, occasionally glancing nervously at the doorway like something might come through it. We searched every inch of that bedroom and found nothing. We rechecked the bathroom, searched the other 2 bedrooms again, looked for any possible trapdoor or hidden passage. There was nowhere for a person to have gone. If someone had been standing at the end of that hallway, and both Rex and I saw them clearly, they should still be in that bedroom. There was no other way out. After about 20 minutes of searching, I told the others I had to get Rex out of the house. His behavior was so unusual that it was actually starting to unnerve the other officers. They could tell something was seriously wrong. Before we left, Rex kept glancing back down the hallway at that bedroom. Like he was making sure whatever had been there wasn't following us. As soon as we stepped outside into the night air, he relaxed slightly. His body language shifted from terrified to just uneasy. When I put him in his crate in my vehicle, he curled up immediately, but he didn't look at me the way he usually did after a search. There was something different in his eyes. Something like betrayal or confusion. Patrol wrapped up the scene not long after. No suspect was ever found, not in the house or the surrounding area. I've replayed that moment thousands of times in my head over the years since it happened. I've tried to rationalize it, to find some logical explanation for what Rex and I both saw. Part of me wants to believe it was a real person, maybe the suspect we were looking for, someone who knew the house had a hidden escape route that we didn't find. Maybe there was a crawl space or false wall that we missed despite our thorough search. But Rex's reaction? I can't explain that away. His tracked armed suspects without hesitation. His entered buildings that were actively on fire. His confronted dangerous dogs, aggressive suspects, every kind of threat you can imagine. He's never been afraid. Never refused to follow a command. Never tried to retreat. Whatever he saw or sensed in that hallway scared him more than anything else has ever encountered. And I trust that dog more than I trust my own instincts. Some people I've told this story to suggest that what we saw was a ghost. I don't know if I believe in that kind of thing. I'm a practical person. I've worked in law enforcement long enough to know that most mysteries have logical explanations. But every once in a while, something happens that you just can't explain. Something that doesn't fit into the neat categories of solved or unsolved. Rex has never reacted like that before or since. He's gone on to have a distinguished career, hundreds of successful searches, multiple apprehensions. He's a professional in every sense of the word. But if you ever try to get him to go back to that house, he won't do it. I know because we drove past it once about a year later, and he immediately started whining and trying to move to the back of the vehicle, as far from that house as possible. Just about everyone in my department has at least one unexplainable call in their career. One night where something happened that doesn't quite make sense, that doesn't fit into the training or the procedures or the logic we rely on. This was mine. And I'll never forget the look in Rex's eyes that night, the absolute terror in an animal that I've never seen scared of anything else. Whatever was standing at the end of that hallway, it wasn't human. I'm as sure of that as I am of anything in my life. Story 2, The Voice of a Child. When I turned 21, I joined the police force in a remote town that I won't name for privacy reasons. The department was desperately short-staffed and needed new officers, and I was a young father who needed steady income and benefits. The timing was perfect. Because I was a rookie, they naturally assigned me to the night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., 12-hour stretches that most veteran officers didn't want. The guys at the station would tease me about always working the worst hours, the graveyard shift, the time when all the drunks and weirdos came out. But honestly, I didn't mind. I've always been a night owl, and there was something peaceful about patrolling empty streets while the rest of the town slept. Most nights were routine. I'd bust people for speeding, pull over the occasional drunk driver, respond to noise complaints or minor domestic disputes. The rest of the time, I'd park somewhere and listen to podcasts or audiobooks. In a weird way, it was almost relaxing. After about a year in the department, something happened that changed everything. A severe thunderstorm rolled into town one night, one of those summer storms that comes out of nowhere with torrential rain, lightning that turns night into day, and thunder that shakes windows. The storm caused major power outages across half the town. Street lights went dark, traffic signals stopped working, and flooding started closing down major roads. To be in the best position possible when accident reports started coming in, I parked my cruiser in a central parking lot downtown where I had good access to most of the main streets. Around 2 a.m., our dispatcher Claire came over the radio. Her voice had that particular tone that immediately gets your attention, not quite panic, but definitely concern. She reported that someone who sounded like an adult male had called 911 claiming to have been kidnapped. The caller said they were being held captive inside someone's home. Then, mid-sentence, the call ended abruptly. When dispatch tried to redial the number, no one answered. My cruiser had a built-in computer display that showed all the call details, address, caller information, GPS coordinates. Based on the location, I was only about 10 minutes away. I was probably the closest officer available. I radioed in that I'd respond and requested backup. Another newer officer named Chris came over the radio and said he could be on location in about 5 minutes. Then Claire came back on the radio. She paused for a few seconds, I could hear the static in her breathing, before she said something that made my skin crawl. The caller sounded like they were altering their voice somehow, possibly through digital means. They sounded like a young girl. Officers should proceed with extreme caution. She used those exact words, like a young girl. All of us at the station were pretty close-knit. We looked out for each other. So when Claire said that, when I heard the worry in her voice, I knew this wasn't going to be a standard call. I radioed back, 10 to 4, en route. Then I turned on my lights and drove toward the address, my mind already running through worst-case scenarios. When I turned into the neighborhood, I saw that every single street light was out. The entire block had lost power. That meant we'd have extremely low visibility into the home we were about to enter, which automatically put us in greater danger. I followed my GPS to the end of the street where the house was located. Chris's cruiser was already there, idling in front of the property. He'd beaten me by maybe a minute. I pulled up next to him and rolled down my window. Rain was coming down in sheets. Chris leaned out his window and said, "Check out this place. Looks like it's been abandoned for years." I looked at the house and immediately understood what he meant. The grass was knee-high, completely overgrown. Wild bushes had grown up in front of the windows, blocking them from view. The roof was visibly damaged, dented in several places, missing shingles, sagging in the middle. Paint was peeling off the siding. It looked completely abandoned. Like no one had lived there or maintained it in years. This immediately sent alarm bells ringing in my head. You can learn a lot about someone's mental state by how they treat their living space. When someone lets their property deteriorate this badly, it usually indicates severe depression, mental illness, or worse. "I'll take the lead," I told Chris. We both stepped out of our cruisers into the pouring rain. I grabbed my umbrella and flashlight, and Chris did the same. We followed a waterlogged path through the overgrown grass toward the front door. Chris clicked on his flashlight and swept it across the front of the house. Whenever you have a second officer present during an investigation, their entire job is to protect the lead officer. They watch the suspect's body language, monitor for threats, and keep their weapon ready in case things go south. Chris was the perfect backup because he was observant and calm under pressure. That allowed me to focus entirely on the suspect's story and determining whether I was hearing the truth or being lied to. When we reached the door, I knocked loudly. Then we stood there in the rain, listening for movement inside. After a few seconds, we heard footsteps. Slow shuffling footsteps approaching the door. Then they stopped right on the other side. Whoever was there was just standing on the other side of the door, completely still. Listening to us just like we were listening to them. A feeling came over me that we were being watched. I let my gaze drift slowly to the peephole in the door. As soon as I made eye contact with it, I saw a distorted shape pull back quickly, like whoever had been looking through the peephole had just jerked their head away. "Police department," I called out firmly. "If you're in there, would like to ask you a few questions. Open the door, please." The person on the other side froze again, like they were considering their options. Then, slowly, I heard the lock turn. The door creaked open, but only about a foot. Just wide enough for someone to peer out. From the darkness inside, a man looked out at us through the gap. He was maybe early 30s, overweight, balding, wearing thick-rimmed glasses that were slightly crooked on his face. I took one look into his eyes and knew immediately that he was hiding something. There was guilt there. Fear. Deception. "We received a 911 call from this address," I said clearly. "Someone reported being kidnapped. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression shifted to confusion, but it felt performed, not genuine. "Oh, that must have been a pocket dial. Sorry about that." "If it was a pocket dial," I said, "how do you explain the voice on the call?" For just a split second, the man's eyes shifted away from mine. Then he said, "I don't know anything about a voice. It must have been the TV or something." "Is there anyone else in the house?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "I live alone. For safety reasons, we need to have a look inside," I told him. His jaw tightened. "Not without a warrant." I expected that response. But these days, a warrant can be obtained in minutes, especially for an emergency like this. I went back to my cruiser, called dispatch, and requested communication with the on-call magistrate. Within 5 minutes, Claire came back over the radio and told me the judge had approved a telephonic warrant. It had been emailed to my computer. I pulled up the warrant, printed a copy from my mobile printer, and walked back to the door. "We have a warrant," I said, showing him the document. "You need to let us inside." The man's hands were visibly shaking as he reluctantly pulled the door open wider. The smell hit me immediately. A putrid, overwhelming stench of garbage, body odor, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something organic and rotten. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The layout was simple, a hallway straight ahead, and a room immediately to my right. I shined my light into the right-hand room and saw what appeared to be a living room. It was absolutely disgusting. Piles of clothes covered every surface. Stacks of dirty dishes, some with food still on them, molding and covered in flies, were scattered across the floor. Cockroaches were crawling over everything. A filthy couch sat at an angle against the wall, and the carpet was stained with God knows what. This was clearly where the man spent most of his time. I'd seen living conditions like this in drug houses before. When people get that deep into addiction or mental illness, they stop caring about basic hygiene and sanitation. When I turned back to look at the man, he shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I made a mental note to search for drug paraphernalia once I'd confirmed the house was safe and no one was in immediate danger. I started toward the hallway when my foot struck something on the floor. I looked down and shined my light on it. It was a pink Barbie dollhouse. One of those large, elaborate ones with multiple rooms and tiny plastic furniture. I recognized it immediately because I'd bought the exact same one for my daughter last Christmas. "Do you have kids?" I asked the man. "No," he said quickly. "But sometimes my nieces come over to visit, so I keep a few toys around for them." Chris and I exchanged a look. We both knew that was bullshit. No mother in her right mind would allow children into this environment. The place was a health hazard. "This is your last chance," I said, turning to face him directly. "Is there anyone else in this house?" "No," he insisted. "There's no one here but me." I started down the hallway. Behind me, I heard the man start to follow, saying nervously, "There's nothing down there. You don't need to." Chris grabbed him by the arm and pulled him back. "Stay here," Chris ordered. The hallway had 2 open doors on either side and a closed door at the far end, probably leading to a basement. I looked into the first room on the right, scanning slowly from right to left. What I saw made my blood run cold. More children's toys were scattered across the floor. Stuffed animals, dolls, building blocks. And there were diapers, packages of disposable diapers stacked in the corner. But what really disturbed me was something in the corner of the room. In the dim light from my flashlight, I saw a large dark shape hunched over in a rocking chair. I drew my weapon, my heart hammering, only to realize a second later that it was a doll. An enormous, life-size doll, sagging forward in the chair with its head down. The shock of that image, thinking for just a moment that it was a real person, made me lean against the door frame to catch my breath. "What is it?" Chris called from behind me. "What did you see?" I didn't answer right away. I was too busy studying the doll. It was dressed in women's clothing, a blouse, jeans, even jewelry around its neck. On the bed next to the rocking chair, more women's clothes were folded into neat, organized piles. Each pile was separated by color, blues together, reds together, whites together. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was absolutely filthy. But this room, with its organized clothes and carefully positioned doll, showed a level of care and attention that was deeply unsettling. "All clear," I finally called back to Chris, though my voice didn't sound quite right. I moved further down the hall to the second bedroom. This one was empty, just a bare mattress on the floor and more trash. Then I reached the final door at the end of the hallway. From behind me, the man suddenly called out, "Actually, why don't we check upstairs instead? There's nothing in the basement." I heard Chris tell him firmly to stay still. The more I moved toward the basement, the more agitated the man became. He was practically begging us to stop. I reached for the door handle, twisted it, and pulled the door open. It squealed loudly on rusted hinges. A set of wooden stairs descended into pitch blackness. I shined my light down and could only see the landing at the bottom. The rest of the basement was too dark to see. From somewhere deep inside that darkness, something rattled. A chain or metal scraping against concrete. I heard movement. I called to Chris. Behind me, the man started apologizing over and over, his voice rising in pitch. I'm sorry, please don't go down there, please." I had no choice. Someone was down there. The 911 call had been real. I started down the staircase, each step creaking under my weight. The rattling sound grew louder, more frantic. Behind me, the man kept begging us to stop, his voice breaking into sobs. I reached the bottom of the stairs and swept my flashlight across the basement. Stacks of boxes, old furniture, piles of junk everywhere. But no person visible. On the far side of the room, there was another door. The noise was coming from there. I drew my weapon and commanded, "This is the police. Whoever's in there, come out slowly with your hands up." The rattling stopped immediately. Complete silence. I shouted the command again. The door remained closed. I crossed the basement, navigating around boxes and debris, my weapon trained on that door the entire time. When I was a few feet away, I stopped and listened. Whoever was inside had gone completely still. My anxiety was through the roof. So many things could go wrong in a situation like this. I positioned myself to the side of the door frame, in case someone inside was armed and tried to fire through the door, and reached for the handle. I counted to 3 in my head, then yanked the door open and immediately aimed my weapon inside. What I saw in that room, I can't describe in detail here. It's an active case, and there are legal and ethical reasons I can't share specifics. But I can tell you this much. There was a man inside. Mid-40s, emaciated, filthy. He'd been reported missing 2 years earlier. His family had assumed he was dead. The entire community had mourned him, held a memorial service, everything. He'd been held captive in that basement for 2 years. Earlier that night, the homeowner had brought him dinner and made a fatal mistake. He left his cell phone on the table just inside the room. The victim managed to activate Siri using voice commands and dial 911. But before he could explain what was happening or give details, the homeowner realized what was happening and came back downstairs. The homeowner couldn't get to the phone, but he made sure the victim couldn't call out for help anymore. By the time we arrived, the victim had been restrained in a way that prevented him from speaking or making substantial noise. When I ordered him to come out, he froze, not because he couldn't obey, but because he was terrified. He thought I might shoot him, thinking he was the threat. We arrested the homeowner immediately and got the victim to the hospital for emergency treatment. He survived. He was reunited with his family. The homeowner is in prison now, serving multiple life sentences. I feel incredibly fortunate that we were able to save him and that no one was harmed during the rescue. But there's one detail from that night that has haunted me every single day since. My dispatcher Claire told us the caller sounded like they were digitally altering their voice to sound like a young girl. Why would a middle-aged man sound like a child when calling 911? The only explanation that makes sense, the only one that fits the evidence we found in that house, is that this man had been forced to speak in that high, childlike voice for so long that even when he was trying to save his own life, that's the only way he could communicate anymore. If he was forced to do that, what else was he forced to do in that house over those 2 years? I don't think I'll ever know the full truth. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Story 3, The Empty Basement. I've been a patrol officer for a little over 8 years now, and I've worked nights for most of that time. When you work midnights, you see a lot. Domestic disputes, drunk drivers, break-ins, overdoses, I've lost count of how many of each. After a while, most calls start to blend together. You show up, separate people if needed, take a report, maybe make an arrest, and then move on to the next one. But there are a handful of calls that stick with you. Calls that don't make sense, where the pieces don't fit together the way they should. This is one of them. It happened in late October a few years ago, around 2:40 in the morning. Dispatch toned me out for a 911 hang-up call. The caller had reported hearing a woman screaming from inside the house next door, then the call disconnected. The address was on a quiet residential street, single-family homes, decent neighborhood, the kind of place where people have lived for decades and know their neighbors. Not an area that generated much police activity. The caller told dispatch that the screaming had stopped by the time she dialed 911, but she was certain she'd heard someone yelling for help. A woman's voice, terrified, desperate. I was only about 5 minutes away. When I pulled up, the street was completely silent. Most houses had their lights off. It was nearly 3 a.m. by this point. A light rain had started to fall, just enough to make the pavement glisten under the streetlights. The house in question was a 2-story place with a small front porch. There were no lights on inside that I could see from my position on the street. I parked a few houses down and approached on foot, staying alert. As I got closer, I noticed something that immediately raised my guard. The front door was slightly open. Not wide open, but cracked, like someone had opened it and not closed it all the way. I radioed dispatch and advised that I was on scene and had an open door. I requested another unit to start my way, but at that time of night, the nearest backup was at least 10 minutes out. I stepped onto the porch and listened. The only sound was the light rain hitting the ground and the distant hum of a streetlight. I knocked on the door frame. Police department. I called out loudly. No response. I knocked again, harder this time. Police. Anyone home? At that point, with a report of screams and an unsecured door, I had exigent circumstances, legal justification to enter without a warrant. Someone might be in danger inside. I pushed the door open slowly with my foot and stepped into the entryway, my hand on my weapon. The house was dark. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it across the interior. The living room was directly ahead. Everything looked normal, furniture neatly arranged, no signs of a struggle, no overturned tables or broken objects. I moved through the living room carefully, checking behind the couch and in corners where someone could hide. Then I moved toward the kitchen. My flashlight beam reflected off clean countertops and a stainless steel sink. There was a glass on the kitchen table with what looked like water still in it, condensation on the outside like it had been filled recently. I made a mental note of that. Someone had been sitting at that table not long ago. I called out again, "Police department. If anyone is in this house, make yourself known." My voice sounded too loud in the silence. It echoed slightly off the walls. I rarely got nervous on late-night calls. It comes with experience, you learn to manage the adrenaline. But something about this house was setting off alarm bells in my head. I kept expecting someone to answer from upstairs, to call out for help or identify themselves. But there was only silence. I moved down a hallway toward the back of the house. Small bathroom on the right, clear. Guest bedroom on the left, clear. At the end of the hallway was a staircase leading up to the second floor. As I put my foot on the first stair, I heard a sound from above. Faint, quick, like a foot dragging across carpet or someone shifting their weight. I stopped and listened. every sense on high alert. I drew my weapon and continued up the stairs slowly, keeping my flashlight aimed ahead, placing each foot carefully to minimize noise. The upstairs hallway had 3 doors. 2 were closed, 1 was slightly open, at the far end of the hall. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it again. That soft shuffling sound, coming from the direction of the open door. I announced myself a 3rd time, "Police! Show me your hands." No response. I approached the open doorway and pushed it wider with my foot, keeping my weapon ready. It was a master bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets partially hanging off onto the floor. A lamp on the nightstand had been knocked over, lying on its side. That was the first thing that looked wrong, evidence of some kind of struggle or disturbance. I swept the room with my flashlight. Checked the closet, empty. Checked under the bed, nothing. The window was closed and locked from the inside. No obvious way in or out from that room. I felt that uncomfortable tightness in my chest you get when the situation isn't adding up, when something is off but you can't put your finger on exactly what. The rest of the upstairs still needed to be cleared. I moved to the 2nd bedroom, a kid's room from the look of it, with toys on the floor and posters on the walls. Empty. The last door was the bathroom. As I reached for the handle, I noticed something on the carpet just outside the door. A dark spot. I thought it was just a shadow from my flashlight at first. Then I crouched down and realized it was wet. I touched it with my gloved hand and brought my fingers up into the light. Blood. Not a huge amount, but enough to form a small pool that had soaked into the carpet fibers. My heart rate spiked immediately. I keyed my radio, "Dispatch, I have blood at the scene. Expedite that backup." I pushed the bathroom door open and flipped on the light switch with my elbow. The shower curtain was closed. There were streaks of blood on the white tile floor leading toward the bathtub. I moved closer, gripped the shower curtain, and yanked it back hard. The tub was empty. But there was more blood near the drain, fresh blood that hadn't fully washed away, like someone had been standing there bleeding just minutes before. I checked everywhere, behind the door, in the linen closet, under the sink. Nothing. Backup was still several minutes out. I was alone in this house with fresh blood and no victim, no suspect, no explanation. I did another sweep of the upstairs, moving more slowly this time, checking every corner and shadow. That's when I heard it. A sound from below. A floorboard creaking under weight. It came from the 1st floor, somewhere in the area of the living room or kitchen. I moved back toward the stairs and aimed my flashlight down into the darkness below. The living room was still dark. I couldn't see movement, but I could feel it. That sensation you get when you're being watched, when someone's eyes are on you even though you can't see them. I descended slowly, trying to control my breathing, my weapon drawn. When I reached the bottom, I cleared the living room again. Then the kitchen. That's when I noticed something I'd somehow missed before, a door near the refrigerator that I'd assumed was a pantry. It was now standing slightly open. I was almost certain it had been closed when I'd cleared the kitchen earlier. I approached it cautiously and pulled it open wider. It wasn't a pantry. It was a staircase leading down into a basement. There was a light switch at the top of the stairs. I flipped it, but nothing happened. Either the bulb was burned out or the power had been cut down there. I radioed my position, "Dispatch, I'm entering the basement." There was no way I was waiting upstairs with someone potentially moving around below me. Every instinct said the answer to this situation was down those stairs. I started down into the darkness, my flashlight cutting through the black. The basement was unfinished, concrete floor, exposed ceiling beams, boxes stacked along the walls. Cold, damp air hit my face as I descended. As I stepped off the last stair onto the concrete floor, my flashlight beam swept across the space. That's when I saw it. In the middle of the room, there was a metal folding chair. Just sitting there in the open, facing away from me. And on the floor beneath it, a pool of blood. Much larger than what I'd seen upstairs. Fresh and still glistening in my flashlight beam. Zip ties were attached to the chair's armrests. They'd been cut, the loose ends hanging down, the plastic still showing the marks where they'd been sliced through. Someone had been restrained in that chair. Recently. I scanned the rest of the basement, moving my light slowly across every shadow. That's when I saw movement in the far corner. A figure bolting behind a stack of boxes. "Stop! Police!" I shouted, moving toward them. But they were fast. They were heading toward the back wall of the basement, where there was a small window near the ceiling, one of those narrow basement windows that let in a little light during the day. I heard glass shatter. By the time I reached that corner, the window was broken and whoever had been down here had forced themselves through the narrow opening. The window led to a side yard between houses. I tried to follow, climbing up and squeezing through the window, cutting my hand on broken glass in the process. Outside, the rain was coming down harder now. I could see a dark figure sprinting toward the alley at the end of the block. I chased after them, but lost sight of them when they turned the corner. By the time I reached the alley, they were gone, could have gone in any direction. Backup arrived minutes later. We set up a perimeter, got K9 units responding, called in detectives. But we never found the person who'd run. The house belonged to a man who lived alone. He wasn't there when we searched the house. We found his wallet upstairs and his phone on the kitchen counter. His car was in the garage. There were clear signs he'd been restrained in that basement chair. The blood we found matched his blood type. A lot of it, but not enough to confirm he'd died there. He was never found. To this day, he's still listed as missing. The neighbor who called 911 swore she heard a woman screaming. But we never identified any female connected to that address. No evidence anyone else lived there, no women's clothing or belongings, nothing. I don't know if I interrupted something in progress or if I walked in after it was already over. But here's what haunts me: if that person in the basement hadn't knocked over those boxes when they were hiding, if they'd stayed perfectly still, I might have cleared the basement, found nothing, and left. I would have walked out of there thinking the 911 call was a false alarm or a mistake. And whatever happened to the man who lived in that house would have remained a complete mystery. The case is still open. Every few months, detectives review it, hoping for new leads. But there's never anything. Every once in a while, when I'm on patrol, I drive down that street. A new family lives in that house now. I see kids' bikes in the driveway, toys on the lawn. It looks like a normal, happy home. But I know what happened there. I know about the blood in the basement, the restraints on the chair, the person who escaped through that window. I know that in the most normal-looking neighborhoods, in houses that seem perfectly safe, the worst things can happen. And sometimes, we're just lucky enough to show up at exactly the right moment, or unlucky enough to see things we'll never be able to forget. 3 police officers. 3 calls that started routine and became something else entirely. 3 nights that changed how they see their jobs, their communities, and reality itself. I want to thank the officers who shared these stories. It takes courage to admit when something happens that you can't explain, especially in a profession where you're expected to have answers for everything. If you found these stories compelling, please like and subscribe. And if you're a police officer or first responder with your own unexplainable story, drop it in the comments. These experiences deserve to be heard. Stay safe out there. Trust your instincts. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous calls aren't the ones you expect. Until next time.